Thank you for joining us for the AfterWord, a podcast put on by the Town Church in order to explore the passage that was just preached. In this case, is 5 books of the Old Testament that we're going to explore a little bit more.
This feels really boring. It feels like a boring intro already.
Well, you know what happened? You guys redid this office, which I'm really grateful for. But there's no interjection of from the loft to frustrate.
From the lounge.
Eric is too relaxed right now. We need to figure out how to
amp me up,
rattle Eric a little from the very beginning. From the lounge is good.
Yeah, I did have someone reach out this week and say even the intro is a little too long for his liking.
Amen.
Now that I know that who this someone is, I can't believe he is offended by
by talking
extra words.
Guy Smiley on the trails.
I'm joined by Rex and Vince and Kirsten and Betty, and I am Eric.
And also Mike is here. Mike is here too.
Oh yeah. How old is Mike?
4, 5 months.
Yeah.
Somewhere around there.
It's fun having him around.
Mike the dog.
Here's our intro question to get us going. What fictional world would you want to live in? And I'll start. How about Middle Earth, living with the elves?
What age of Middle Earth? Like, where are we talking?
I don't know the differences. The one where there's the elves living in Rivendell. Rivendell, that's where I'd like to visit.
You want to live in Rivendell? Okay, is this before or after the Silmarillion? No, okay, I'll stop.
Okay, nerds.
Next.
I don't have an answer yet, so somebody else talk.
I don't know why, but the one that keeps coming to mind is where the Smurfs live. I have no idea why. Maybe
What's
it's
that
the
called?
only. I don't know. Smurfville. I don't know, but it's from like the 1980s cartoon. I haven't seen anything beyond that. So
you live in giant mushrooms.
Yeah.
And Gargamel and his cat Azrael are always after you.
Yeah. I don't know why. I don't know many fictional worlds, if we're going to be honest. I went back to 1986, so I feel like that's
so we
my
have
answer.
Smurf World and Rivendell so far.
I would want to live in the Harry Potter universe and go to Hogwarts and be British. And
aren't you going to Hogwarts soon?
Yeah, no, yes, I am. Actually, I got my letter. I'm going.
You got your letter?
Yeah,
they send you a letter?
Yeah.
Wait.
Have you ever read Harry Potter?
What are you talking about?
Oh, okay. What?
What are you talking about? Saying you're going to go to Hogwarts for real?
She's going to
Universal
Studios.
Yes.
Later this week and going to Hogwarts.
Yes. Or I'd want to live in the Lego world and be a Lego.
Rex, Vince?
I still am. I don't know.
You're trying to think of a fictional world.
You're trying to come up with something better than Smurf World.
What about Silver Spoons? What was there something from that?
Oh.
Yeah, because there was a train
that
rode around
and they had a duck phone.
Yeah.
Wah, wah, and they pick up. I have no idea. I mean, I find myself to be so serious that it's hard to put myself into a world. I mean, I'd rather talk about serious things of God.
Okay. I mean, Rivendell's a really good answer.
Thank you.
I think Rivendell's a great answer. To do something different, maybe Narnia after the witch is dead, though. Yeah, that'd be a nice
That's
place.
totally what I said like 10 minutes ago on the car ride here.
Yeah, like you don't want pre-dead witch Narnia. You want post. You want Christmas too.
Yeah.
Always winter, but never Christmas. You don't want that world.
No, you don't want that world.
Yeah.
Vince, could you give us a serious recap?
Oh, I was like, I told you I don't have an answer. 5 major prophets is what 4 major prophets and a poem slammed in the middle. Isaiah, Jeremiah, both prophesied really long books. This is a little fun fact. Jeremiah, word for word, is actually longer than Isaiah.
Huh.
It's a long book. So is Isaiah. But Isaiah and Jeremiah prophesied before the exile, and Ezekiel and Daniel prophesied from the exile after the people are exiled into Babylon. And Lamentations, although it's not a prophet, it was likely written by Jeremiah, and he wrote it to lament the sin that they were going through and what he's prophesying about. and all of those point to Jesus. In a lot of, I mean, these books they're full of references to who the Messiah who's coming. You can start in Isaiah and just work your way through there. There's a lot of places. So it's a chore for me to try to figure out how do I point to different things without just spending 6 hours walking through all of the really profound places that the Messiah is hinted at. Not much of a recap, but there it is.
So you pulled out of these 5, you had 5 different kind of themes in each one. Isaiah being God saves, Jeremiah, God renews, Isaiah, Lamentations, God grieves, Daniel, God restores. Ezekiel, God restores, and Daniel, God reigns.
Yeah.
Just really practically, what might be some helpful pointers for people who are reading the major prophets, understanding that there's some weird stuff, like hard to understand things in there, some bizarre things. They're also highly situational specific as we read through. Well, what are some pointers maybe for us today in reading these major prophets?
I mean, these are going to be simple, but I think I would say give yourself some grace. It's okay to read through them with a good pace and be okay not completely understanding everything that's going on. But to read it in a way that you're able to see the English headings are really helpful actually in our Bibles. They give a synopsis of what's happening. So the headings of the different sections are really helpful. Read through it quickly, see what's there. Don't get bogged down in I mean, they're long, 66 chapters in Isaiah. What is it, 58 in Jeremiah, and on and on. So they're really long. But that's a thought. I spent the summer reading through Isaiah, and there were times whenever I'd open it up the next morning and think, I don't remember what I read yesterday. And that's okay. So I just kept moving.
They're really challenging though, because Isaiah is not necessarily chronological.
Yeah,
it's not as linear as like you're coming out of narrative.
Yeah,
it's strange. I think maybe I'd throw in with prophecy. I've heard somebody say with biblical prophecy, generally think forth-telling more than foretelling.
Yep.
So like while this was there's some instances of this of God saying, here's what's going to happen if you do not turn. Like I think of Jeremiah and Isaiah. These are all things that were already said in covenant curses in Deuteronomy, so like you'll go into a foreign land, these kind of things if you don't follow me. So while they are strange and symbolic and all this kind of thing, it can be really overwhelming and unhelpful to try to figure out, okay, I'm reading this here. Where do I draw this thing into modern days? Because remember, it was prophesying to a specific people in those ways. And then the other thing I've heard people say is like the more that you have immersed yourself in the rest of the Old Testament, the more you'll be able to track with the prophets, because it's picking up on all these themes that are already there. It's picking up on the language of the covenant, on the language of Israel's history. So it's a little easier to track if you've spent time reading the rest of the Bible as well.
Yeah, remembering that Isaiah, Jeremiah are written during the time periods of 1st and 2nd Chronicles, 1st and 2nd Kings. So you've got the overlap there. I think it's always fascinating to me to place the Old Testament writers where they are, because it's 39 books, and you're like, where is this in chronological order? How does this fit? But to place them in the context that they're in. So I think that's helpful. I think this is. We'd need a lot more time to talk about this, but I think a way to read them also is to zoom out as far as you can and say, okay, what was the overarching sin of the people? And really the big umbrella sin was that they had turned away from God and put their trust in other things. So to read through these prophets with that in mind for heart application, how have I turned away from God and sought hope in other things? And how do these prophets speak to that in me? Could be helpful.
I think, too, you can look for just themes of very basic themes of the people rebel, but then you see God's redemption, and then you see the people rebel and you see God's redemption. And so I think that's always encouraging to see how God repeatedly shows up over and over again and brings redemption for his people. And then I think there's also just little nuggets throughout all of those books that have been deeply encouraging to me. Like there's one that I don't remember the reference right now, but I remember when Ezra was sick and I was reading through lots of different parts of scripture, but a verse that says, "Those who survived the sword found grace in the wilderness," and just feeling like, okay, God is going to provide grace in the wilderness. And so I think there's lots of little nuggets throughout all of the Old Testament prophets that you can find encouragement even in your present moment as well.
Yeah, there is a lot in these prophets that are, it's warning of judgment coming. It's judgment spoken that is here. But throughout, there's also a lot of comfort from God, that we hear of his comfort. We know that he's present. He is the one to turn to. So, and at times you have to look for it. I mean, it's a long chapter of judgment, and then there's a verse, but I'll put my hope in the Lord and his salvation. And so there's hopeful pieces in there, but you have to look for them.
Yeah. And I also think even just like what you said, but focusing on the character of God through these things and what he's, it can come across so judgmental, but like you said, there's these breaths of fresh air.
Yeah.
Where I think of, it's oft quoted, but it's I know the plans I have for you. And Jeremiah towards the end, like to restore, and people love to take that out of context or argue about how it's taken out of context or whatever, but it does say something about the character of God.
Yeah.
He's a God who wants to restore, or I think of in Lamentations, it's been a great comfort to me where it says, I will restore the years the locusts have eaten.
Mm-hmm.
There's something there like, hey, this destruction has come, this darkness is here, but like there's a restoration coming.
Right.
And that says something for the character of God.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we see a God who interacts with his people and the situations that they're in. So here's a question I'd like to ask. If you think over your own life, can you think of a time when God responded to a situation in your life? So very specific, kind of pointed here. We see him doing that with Israel over generations and generations. What about in your life so far? Is there an example that you'd be willing to share where you saw God respond to something very specific about a situation that you were in?
I have one that's still unresolved. I think often the way that the Spirit speaks to me or leads me is by just affirming things in his word. And so when Ezra was sick, I was walking one day and the phrase mighty works popped into my head. And it came out of nowhere. And I was in a season that I was writing everything down that I thought God might be saying, because I didn't know at the time if I actually would even know God's voice if I heard it. And so I asked him to affirm that in his word. And it didn't happen for quite a few days. And then it was near the end when Ezra was losing his battle and I wasn't sleeping much. And so I was up very early and had just spent hours and hours praying, and I heard my boys stirring upstairs, and so I stood up and a passage popped into my head, and I looked it up and it had the phrase mighty works in it, and that actually happened 2 more times after a long time of prayer. And at the time I wrongly applied it and assumed that God was saying he was going to do a mighty work and heal Ezra. And he didn't do that. And so that's the piece that feels unresolved still at this point, that I'm waiting, that I don't know what he has for that. But I do believe that he gave me that phrase and then he affirmed it 3 times over. So I'm curious about that.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. Others?
Say your question again. Are there ways in which God has responded to us?
Yeah, we see him doing that with the people of Israel over generations. There's something in your life, a specific situation that you feel God responded to you over.
There was a moment earlier this year, I guess. We had a difficult season at our past church, something we had to walk through. And we're just feeling uncertain about what we were supposed to do. And there was something that me and Kinsey maybe got excited about. We're like, maybe we should lean into this and go this direction, and had prayed about it. And I remember waking up one morning, and it was like the least dramatic. That's how I knew it wasn't something made up. It was like the least dramatic, weird sense of, it wasn't in a sense, it wasn't audible. It might as well have been, but it was like, don't go. It wasn't to the town church in Fort Collins.
Yeah, I was gonna say, but you came anyway.
You're here in disobedience.
No, it wasn't. But like there was this weird, almost like frustrating clarity around it, and we weren't really. I wasn't sure why in the moment, but I felt like that was a moment in which God was responding to our questions. Like, God, what are you doing, or what are we supposed to do? There was some wrestling going on that led us here eventually, but like, yeah. Anyway, that's really vague and hard to get into without much of a backstory. But.
Yeah. I think the thing that comes to mind for me, so often, I feel like God affirms, confirms, brings to light different things through reading His Word. So I see a lot from that. But also, I've over the last several years, I've struggled quite a bit with discontentment, and not based on anything really, just based on my own sinfulness. But I spend a good chunk of time, and I still do. I have a book of prayers that I write down, and one of my prayers for myself is that I would be content. And I feel like God has overwhelmingly responded in kindness to that, where I'm in a place of pretty deep contentment about most things of life. And I see that as a gift from God. I haven't put anything into practice where I've thought, I'm going to do this and that, and that's going to help with my contentment. I really do feel like it's the kindness of God to answer that and respond in that way.
I think a lot of things surrounding missions comes to mind. I mean, that is also the dominant thing, like, on my heart and mind recently. But, like, between my junior and senior year, I had been able to go overseas and really felt the Lord confirm, like, the call to go to the nations, but, like, knew that it wasn't going to be right after college. And I think that was kind of confusing and frustrating in some ways, because I was like, this just doesn't seem like the time. But I was wondering and asking God, like, what that could be, and just kind of figured it was like some way off distant thing, if it wasn't going to be immediate. And I think, like, I've seen God answering prayers and, like, opening doors, and a lot of that has been through, like, where He has very specifically placed me in this season, and has shown me that I think if I had tried to make my own way after college, it would have been something completely different, and probably ultimately would have been maybe more harmful for me in some ways. But it's, like, through connection here in this church that He has, like, shown me what next steps are and how He wants to lead, and has responded to, I don't know, the uncertainty about what that could ever look like, and has now opened these doors that I never thought would be here.
So the God that we see in the major prophets interacting with His people is the same God that's interacting with us personally today. We could also argue the town church and the church in America and the church globally as well, but we certainly see Him doing the same thing today. So I want to ask this question, like, what just struck you generally from walking through those 5 books yesterday as Vince brought us through them? Is there anything that particularly struck you?
I think the consistency of the common thread, that it is woven through every single major prophet very clearly. Like, it's not even obscure in a lot of them. Like, it's very clear, and that God wasn't trying to hide His plan. I mean, He made it very clear what His plan was going to be and revealed that to His people. And then we're working, I'm in one of the 1 Peter groups right now that's working on memorizing, and the verse that I don't know if we're doing it right now, we're getting close to it, says that it was revealed to the prophets that they were...
Come on, you got this.
I got this. It was revealed to them. I can't remember right now. I was just working on it today. But basically that it was not for themselves. It was for us. It was for the people that were going to believe in the future. And so that blows my mind that God revealed to these prophets that were prophesying about the coming Messiah that it was not for their benefit, but it was actually for the benefit of the future believers.
Yeah, I think this is very, very general, and I said this on Sunday, but I think the thing that stands out for me in an overarching way is that God is a God who responds to his people. He's not a God who's so far off and does not relate and does not have a relationship with, or does not even desire a relationship with his people, but he responds. He has a way in which he has asked us to live, and when we don't live that way, he has to respond, and he does. But he does it not so that he can get rid of us, get rid of the problem, but so that we would be wooed back to him. There's this dynamic relationship that's ongoing with the God of the universe that's profound.
Yeah, and there's so much of it I don't understand. So one example is God grieving. The Bible is clear in many places that God does have some sense of grief over what we experience here, over sin. We saw that when we walked through like David and Saul and the expressions of God's grief there, especially around Saul. I don't completely understand that. A perfect being who also grieves over some of the things that his creation is experiencing. It's true, but there's tension there in my mind as well. So to your point, Vince, he interacts, he responds, but there's also some mystery there, a lot of mystery there in what that means.
This isn't necessarily something that was said yesterday, but what you were saying earlier, Rex, made me think of this. Like something that just, I've been in reading through 2nd Chronicles right now, but have been in Kings and Chronicles recently. And I think just the ways that you also tied in, like these are, like what is being prophesied is speaking directly to like the history of Israel, and seeing like how the prophets become just more understandable in some ways based on how we're reading about Israel's history was really cool to see come together just throughout yesterday in some ways, and being reminded that God is bringing a message of one, repentance, but also hope and reconciliation and redemption through his people and for his people at the same time. Because as I'm reading those books, it's easy to be like, oh, like this is really hard and sad to read, and just over and over all these leaders who are leading God's people into idolatry, but then seeing at the same time, like this is what God is saying to his people in the midst of all of that.
That's good.
Let me shift a little bit. I want to shift to talk about lamenting a bit. We see this throughout the major prophets, but especially Jeremiah and especially the book of Lamentations. I'm trying to formulate my question. Like, what exactly my question? What's the place of lamenting in the Christian's life, particularly as we look at it pointing us forward to Jesus?
I don't know if I get your question exactly, but I think it's I think there has to be some level of grief over our sin. I think it must be there. I think it's a part of repentance. I don't think we repent. We don't turn from things that don't in some way affect our hearts, that we would grieve them. And I think what the Psalms do, and what Jeremiah does in part, and what he does in Lamentations, shows us that those things spoken, or those things written, those things communicated are also powerful. We're able to communicate clearly, this is how I'm grieving. That's necessary, I think, for the Christian life, to be vocal about the ways in which we've turned away from God and how he has called us back. Because I think in our communication of how we've turned from God, we see very clearly the mercy of God, that he would receive us back. I think it's important. So I'm not sure if I'm answering your question exactly, but
yeah, no, that makes sense. And I think looking at the shape of laments is powerful. I think if you take Lamentations chapter 3, it's got some famous passages in it, but it's like I guess the beginning, it starts with like in verse, I can't remember where it is in chapter 1. It says something like, the Lord is right in doing this. Like the Lord is right because we have not pursued him. It's that sort of thing. You get to chapter 3 and he's talking about all these things. It's like, I'm becoming the laughing stock of the peoples, the object of their taunts. He's filled me with bitterness. He sated me with wormwood. He's made my teeth to grind on gravel. My soul's bereft of peace. My endurance has perished, and so has my hope from the Lord. And then it turns. He says, but this I call to mind, and therefore I have hope. The steadfast love of the Lord never ceases. His mercies never come to an end. They are new every morning. Great is your faithfulness. The Lord is my portion, says my soul. Therefore I will hope in him. So there's this sense in like a lament it's different than a confession, but there is a sense of like seeing things as they are and decrying things as they are. And in the case of this, owning that this is just, that God is doing things, but then again, there's a sense in which through that, Jeremiah comes back to the character of the Lord as gracious, is full of steadfast love. This is like he's saying and he's seeing, hey, this is who God said he was, gracious, abounding in steadfast love, good to all, but who will by no means clear the guilty.
Right.
But like we can trust God in this part of his character as well. And that's not to like tie a bow around it quickly, like to make this sad thing happy because, yeah, God is good. I mean, God is going to be faithful. But there is this sense in which like the groanings here, the longings, the frustrations, the anger, the hurt, is all done in the context of remembering who God is. So I think that, I don't know if that answers your question, like what is a lament, but it's like feeling the brokenness caused by the sin of the world and individual sin, but viewing the long game, the long truth and the hope we can have in God's character.
I think there's times too that like lament is a process. It's not something that you do once and then it's resolved. And so we go through long seasons of lament that we can't yet see or maybe even trust in the steadfast love of the Lord. Like we just don't feel it or experience it. And so I think that in those seasons that are long and painful, we just keep crying out to the Lord. And I think that's what lament does, is it takes the pain and the anguish that we're experiencing in it, and it causes us to cry out to the Lord. And we just keep doing that until in his mercy, he brings us to a place of experiencing and understanding his comfort and the hope that there still is. But I think it's a discipline that directs our hearts towards the Lord in our pain.
Yeah, and I think it's valuable. If you've never done it before, it is valuable just to get a journal or some pages and begin to type out or write out with a pen the ways in which you have you are grieving over your own sin or grieving over the ways in which the consequences of sin have affected you. There's something valuable, I think, about writing it out, seeing it, experiencing this is a real thing. And then, like you were saying, Rex, as Jeremiah does, or whoever the author of Lamentations is, as he does, but he's able to turn that. And I think it's hard to turn it toward the steadfast love of the Lord never ceases if we haven't also confessed or expressed or communicated. And the reason I'm experiencing the steadfast love is because I'm going through this. Yeah. And so I think both are necessary. So if that's not a practice that you've made and you're walking through a season of waiting or whatever that is, it's helpful to write it out.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. I think there's something about what you see Jeremiah or whoever the author is here, like we keep saying that. Yeah. We exploring the depths of this disappointment, of this pain, and doing so in a way that became very public. Who knows what it was meant to be? Right. I have a journal that I have when I get overwhelmed or my brain gets too loud. Sometimes it's like a continued like stream of prayer is difficult, and so I write is what I do. I write out prayers in these ways, and some of them are these kind of wrestling things. And I've always joked, I hope my kids don't find these one day. But like there is something valuable in not like being irreverent and making God your punching bag, but the legit, like the expression, the thoughtful expression of this turmoil, and being able to look at it, and from there, being able to say, great is thy faithfulness.
Right.
So anyway,
That's good.
This isn't an answer necessarily to the question, but I think it's helpful to, one, just see the examples of lamenting in Scripture and have conversations like this, because I think if I had been asked like a few years ago, just kind of about like where lamenting like fits into our lives and our relationship with God, I think I struggled to see how that could exist with being content like in all things. And so I don't know. I think it can be easy maybe to fall into that, or to view like, oh, like, so now this is an opportunity to just complain. Like, that there is a healthy and beautiful way to do this, and how this makes our relationship and communion with God richer. I don't know if that makes sense, but yeah, I think it's just easy to be like, oh, I can't be upset about how things are. Like, I have to be content, but that's just not true.
Well, and I said this on Sunday, we see it, Jesus does this often, where you see the grieving that he has over sin and sin's effects. He's grieving the loss of his friend Lazarus, but he knows what's coming, and he knows what is going to happen with Lazarus, but he's still grieving the effects of sin and the brokenness that sin has placed in this world. And that's right. I mean, that's not something that we would say, well, Jesus was just being discontent there. We would say that's right. I think about the song, It Is Well. Like that song, the story of the man that lost his wife and children at sea, but he still is able to write It Is Well. And that song loses its power if you don't know the meaning, I think. If you don't know what he's writing in, the context of what he's writing in. There's deep lament, there's deep grief over the sorrow that he has walked through, and still he's able to say, it is well with my soul, or the steadfast love of the Lord never ceases, or whatever it is. So I think they have to go hand in hand. To stay in a place of grieving may foster a discontentment, but to be in a place of grieving, lamenting, and say, but I still know God's God, is the way I think we have to go.
I think just the fact that you use that example makes me think of just like a lack of understanding around this before. Because I remember hearing that, like the story behind that hymn as a kid, and being like, shoot, so I have to be like totally okay if something like horrible happens to my family, and just like had no framework for like, that's not what that means. Yeah. So
it is remarkably real, isn't it? The major prophets, including Lamentations, meaning that God is interacting with his people around real, very, very real situations, and often it's their sin and what will happen because of it. And then also in the laments, we get very, very real thoughts and feelings around things that are actually happening and affecting God's people there as well. I don't think I've thought about the major prophets like that before. I think I've thought of it mostly through just the lens of judgment, but maybe a little bit detached from, God's taking seriously where his people are really at, where their hearts are really at, where their heads are really at. And so God is taking some action there. Yeah.
And think about, as we were just talking about all that, how in the middle of Lamentations, it takes this turn. The steadfast love of the Lord never ceases. The major prophets in total turn on, but Jesus is coming, right? That's the big turn, where we see this like 66 chapters and 50 some chapters in Jeremiah and 39 or 8 laborious chapters of Ezekiel, but it all finds its rest in Jesus being the fulfillment of all of that. That's where the turn is for us.
Yeah. So it's really instructive for me thinking about today. So if the major prophets are really real, which of course they are, and the turning point is Jesus, well, then that means in my life today, my real life, like the turning point is still Jesus. Like whether it's something I'm lamenting over, or it's sin that God is killing in my life, or it's a joyful experience, whatever it is, Jesus is still the turning point, so to speak, that points me forward.
And I think it's important to remember, if our listener is one who is in a season of lament and brokenness, like Jesus didn't come for hundreds of years after the major prophets. And so, like, I think we often have this hope that it's going to turn in the middle of Lamentations, like I'm going to be lamenting and then I'm going to turn and everything's going to feel okay. But the reality is that sometimes you just have to keep lamenting and keep lamenting and keep lamenting. And you can have confidence that Jesus is going to bring healing and restoration to whatever it is that you're navigating. But I think it rarely comes in the time frame that you're hoping it will.
Yeah. And yet I love in Galatians 4 is where it says he came in the fullness of time. So it's like this was the exact moment that was right. And there is a sense of like looking at Lamentations and the rest of the prophets of remembering, remembering exile is kind of like where we are, and thinking, okay, well, in the fullness of time, all things will be made new. All things will be restored. We have what they were prophesying about at this point and being in the new covenant, but there's a sense in which laments will continue until the Lord sees fit to make all things new, and we won't be all the way out of exile until then.
Right. Yeah. The lamenting didn't stop when Jesus came.
Yeah.
We see the fulfillment of the prophets as they pointed forward to Jesus, but the ultimate fulfillment of that will be when Jesus returns. I think about you go to this often, Kirsten, Hebrews 11. They just where the author just rattles off all these people who in their faith lived out their lives in some really hard things, and at the end of that he says, and yet, this is my horrible paraphrase, and yet all these people were hoping for something that they never fully realized, but it was coming. And so they lived in that waiting period, and we still do as well to some extent, although we know now it's Jesus and he is returning.
That was the question formulating in my mind. Like, what is different for us versus the people that the major prophets are writing to? One, knowing we know more of Jesus and God's plan there. Yeah. Is there anything else that comes to mind that's different for us as we apply what we're reading here in the major prophets, that God saves, he renews, he grieves, he restores, he reigns? We say, yep, that's still true today, but is there anything different for us being in the new covenant?
And we have the Spirit. So we have the Comforter in the midst of all of that.
Yeah, I think also, you just said it, Eric, the new covenant. That's a big turning point. It was promised in Jeremiah, and Ezekiel gives the promise of new hearts. But that wasn't fully realized, and so there's a shift there whenever Jesus does come, and those things are turned, and when the Spirit does land, and we're given the Spirit. And the ultimate fulfillment, the culmination of all that will be when Jesus returns.
I like that Gentiles are now in the mix.
I'm glad you like that. Good.
Just wanted to share that.
Thanks for sharing, Eric. Eric, I value what you've shared today.
Thanks so much. I'm struggling
I like
today.
lamp.
As another Gentile, I also appreciate that.
Yeah.
As a fellow Gentile.
Yeah. Here's a really good question. I have a really good question here.
Okay, we'll see.
So
we'll see.
What is God like according to the major prophets?
That's a great question.
Thank you.
God, he cares about us enough that he would respond to us. And although that response may not always feel great, he's a God who doesn't just shove us off. He's not an angry God who... what was was it, maybe it was last week, the assurance that we read that God, that he's not a God who deals with us according to our sin, but because of Christ, sees Jesus as taking care of that. And he responds in that. He's not one who just shoves us off when the first thing we do against him.
He's not a God that remains hidden, and he will reveal his plan, and he revealed his plan throughout all of the major prophets of what was coming. And so we had a lot of pieces of the puzzle already, and God wanted that.
I'd actually probably largely echo what Kirsten said, because what came to mind was thinking about how God was revealing his plan throughout like all of the major prophets. And I've been memorizing like the end of Isaiah 52 into Isaiah 53, and like there right is like a huge example of how clearly we see God's plan for redemption.
Yeah, I mean, I think I've said this before, but we see the faithfulness of God here. We see God responding and continuing to pursue. And even though the major prophets are full of strange visions and weird things, we get this sense of God's cosmic arc towards redemption for his people. We joke about Ezekiel, but man, I get emotional like reading it. At the beginning, what you see Ezekiel down by the river, and he's just been forced out of his home, and that was like the glory of God was Jerusalem. And he sees a vision of, the Godmobile or whatever you want to call it, the big thing with the wheels or whatever,
the eyes and
the wheels, and you see that leaving. He sees that leaving Jerusalem. So it's like the glory of God is leaving, and then you go to the end of Ezekiel, and what do you see? You see God showing, like him being shown in visions, like a new Jerusalem, where God's glory fills the temple in a new way, and they relate to the God in a way that they haven't yet. So I don't know. There's this cosmic and huge and confusing in the prophets, like arc towards redemption and God glorifying himself and redeeming his people. And so faithfulness, I think, is what you see there.
Yeah. What comes to mind for me is God's holiness. He really, really hates sin. Partly, well, because he's holy, but also because he knows what that does to his beloved. And so we see his hatred of sin, and then to Vince, your point, at the same time, he doesn't just reject us. He's patient, and he has a plan for redemption for us. It's beautiful.
Yeah.
All right, this Sunday,
let's tackle
12 books?
12 books. The minor prophets this week as we close out the series. My hope is that this has been helpful. I was talking to my boys last night, and one of our sons said it's been really helpful to go through this series and just get a big, broad overview of the Old Testament. And he said, so that when I read the Old Testament, I have a time frame for where these things are going. So that's been my hope. And if one of my sons has been impacted by this, then there we go. But that's been my hope, is that we see a big, broad overview of the Old Testament in its entirety and see the beautiful fulfillment of it in Jesus, which is maybe where we're headed in the new year. But I'm not going to share that yet.
I hope so.
Spoiler, we may talk about Jesus next year.
Yeah. We're going to turn over a new leaf and talk about Jesus next year.
So minor prophets this Sunday, then we're into Advent.
Yep. It's wild.
That is wild. All
this
right.
year during Advent, too, we're going to talk about Jesus.
Let's just keep doing that. Thank you for listening. We'll see you Sunday.
Adios.